Næstan á svið ætlum við að fá Mats Johansson, framkvæmdastjóri Verslunarráðsins í Svíþjóð, en Svíar eru komnir langt í hæfniþróunarmálum og þar er margt til fyrirmyndar, þó svo að einnig megi finna hjá þeim áskoranir til umhugsunar fyrir okkur. Mats, ég ætla að skipta aðeins yfir í ensku og þeir bara, ég treysti því að allir hér skilja hvað við erum að fara og erindið hans verður líka á ensku. Mats has been working in education since the late 1990s, focusing on projects that connect education with the surrounding community. For the past 10 years, he has served as an education and competence expert and CEO for the Swedish Retail and Wholesale Council. Erindi sem Mats flytur heitir Competence Provision through Collaboration among Social Partners sem mætti útleggja sem færni uppbygging með samstarfi aðila vinnumarkaðarins. Akkurat það verkefni sem við erum í hér. Welcome, Mats. We are very pleased to have you with us today. You know the controls and everything.
Perfect.
Water?
Yes, please. Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here in Reykjavik. And I'm sorry about my bad Icelandish. I wish I could speak in your language, but I can't, and I guess you will not understand Swedish. You probably understand Swedish more than I do Icelandic, right? So let's keep to English then. Yeah, as said, I work for the Swedish Retail and Wholesale Council, and my aim here is to sort of tell you a little bit about the collaboration within the Swedish Retail and Wholesale Council. I will talk a little bit about the work that we do when it comes to competence provision, and then I will talk a little bit about our view, especially my view, of learning objectives and share some of our experiences when it comes to mistakes when it comes to validation, really, if you look at it. But start with the Retail and Wholesale Council. The council was founded in 2015, and the parties, it's the two major employer organizations and the three unions who are organizing white collars and blue collars within Swedish retailing and wholesaling. So we have different areas where we work. Basically, we work in the areas where the social partners have agreed to work and where they are in agreement. Right now in Sweden, we are coming to the negotiations, and this week the sort of quarrel started when it comes to wages and that sort of things. But when it comes to the Retail and Wholesale Council, we only do things where the social partners has agreed how to do things. So what they have agreed to work with is occupational health and safety. We have some digital courses and so on when it comes to that. We work with research and development. I would say 2/3 of the funds that we get each year are used to fund research within retailing and wholesaling. We work with competence provision. I will come back to that. And we also have an economic council with 4 independent economists who make a report each year about the state of retailing and wholesaling in Sweden. It could be about sustainability, it could be about artificial intelligence or something that is a current issue within retail and wholesaling in Sweden. But they are independent, and the other 3 are sort of part of the council. For each area, we have representatives for the social partners. So we have a working committee for each area with 6 members who are actually the decision makers when it comes to the practical work. But I thought I would talk a little more about competence and the competence committees part. And if you look at it, the aim of the competence committee is to encourage and enable more people to establish themselves and develop within the fields of retail and wholesale. And if you look at the words, you can see that it's both to encourage and enable. It's both for those who are getting established and those who are already there and are supposed to develop. So it's both about attraction of retail and wholesale as a sector, and it's also about the competence needed to work there. If we start with the sort of, and the activities are very much, we work with strategic issues when it comes to competence provision. We try to work towards the government. We try to get more programs and educations for retailing and wholesaling. We have a project for industry branding where we are trying to say, this is the message that we would like to send out about how it is to work within retailing and wholesaling in Sweden. And we also work with the SEQF qualification, or has been doing some work there in order to sort of get a common language about the competencies needed to be active in occupations within retailing and wholesaling in Sweden. In order to get the competence, we also support education. We have material for upper secondary schools that can be used in order to train students for retailing and wholesaling. We also do professional development for teachers. Next week on Tuesday, we are having our annual meeting, and we will gather like 130 teachers from all over Sweden who are teaching at upper secondary level retailing and wholesaling. And the day after, we will have a big day with like 200, 250 persons, where the companies and the people within the social partners and so on will also be part of the day. So we're trying to connect education to the sector. And then also, if you want the sector to be attractive, communication is a key component. So we are marketing towards upper secondary trade education. We are trying to highlight careers and occupations within retailing and wholesaling. And we also take part in skills competition. I don't know if you have world skills competitions where they compete on European and world. There is world championships for visual merchandisers and so on. But we are trying to do fun things in order to make the sector more attractive, so to speak. And one of the things that we have is our occupational map. I'm not at the internet right now, but I have a screenshot. So what we found out was that many people in Sweden, I think it's the same here, when you say that you are working with occupations within retailing and wholesaling, their mindset on the sector would be, okay, working in a retail store, how hard could it be? And the fact is, if you look at it, a company like H&M selling clothes, a few years ago they counted the different occupations or job roles within H&M, and there were like 200 of them. The sales advisor is an important job, and they probably have, in the numbers, they probably have most sales advisors. But when it comes to different roles, there's more than 200 different roles: visual merchandiser, IT technology, and so on. So we tried to find a few or a couple of occupations and highlight them on our website. And we also have, if you sort of click on one occupation, you can see where are the career paths where I can develop. And for each of the occupations, we have a short movie. We have some interviews with people, role models who are working within the occupation. We highlight educational paths and so on. So I guess we can put the link somewhere. It's not in Icelandic, but I think you can get it, and you can play around. It's kind of interesting. But then again, if you have 200 different roles within H&M, it's not complete. And we are aware of that. We are just grasping, but it's trying to get some inspiration for careers within education, retailing and wholesaling, so to speak. So that's just a short thing about the Swedish Retail and Wholesale Council and what we are doing within competence provision. When it comes to getting these things that you have to know, be able to do, and have ability to do the right things within retailing and wholesaling. For instance, when you are a sales advisor or a store seller, we have tried to put this into qualifications. And I guess for some of you, this is like open doors. I'm not supposed to kick in open doors here, but we are also talking about learning outcomes. And when it comes to learning outcomes, I would say that we are talking about knowledge, that is facts and things I need to know, the skills, how I do things in the right way, and then we talk about ability, or in the European qualification framework, independence and responsibility. But if you talk about ability, it could be formed as doing the right things. Because it's not always that doing things right would be the right thing at that moment in that situation. I remember I was taking a crash course in Russian 20 years ago, and we were supposed to go to Russia, and the vice principal at the school joined us for going to Russia and visiting we stayed in a family for 6 weeks. And when we got to Moscow, the group who had learned some Russian words had a very problematic way when we got to buy food, because we tried to remember what was the name for chicken, kuritsa, yeah? Okay, potatoes, kartoshka. And we tried to make sentences and try to order what to eat. And then Pelle, the vice president of the school, he didn't know any Russian. So he just walked up to the girl who stood there and said, "Hi, I'm Pelle. Nice to meet you." And then he started talking Swedish. Kan jag få en av de här där? Nej, inte den, utan ta den gröna. Och sen så det där ser gott ut. Jag tar en sån också. Och ja, och lite av den där kycklingen. Det blir bra så här. And the girl there laughed her head off. And he got the things he needed. She showed him the calculator, and he paid, and he took his brick, and he said to us, "That wasn't too hard, was it?" But he did not do it right, but he did the right thing in order to get the meal. And we, who had actually learned some Russian words, we couldn't do it because we didn't do the right thing, right? So there is something when to know how to do it, and then also to have the ability to do the right thing. And I think it's important. I will come back to that. You are also talking about different types of competencies. We are talking in terms of general competencies. We are talking about competencies that are specific to some kind of occupation, right? And when we look at this, we can see that there are things like communication that is important in practically every job. So there are general things that are based on knowledge and skills that are established and used in many occupations. And then there are specific competencies that is needed in this specific occupation, right? What we have found, or an idea that we have been talking about when we are making our qualifications and talk about, is that sometimes the general competence is the key competence in a certain occupation. And therefore, you could say, if you are working in a store, you could say that communication is very important. It's something that is very important. And everybody works with communication. So in that sense, the person who said, "How hard can it be?" the conclusion could be that that person is right? But when you look at it, when it comes to knowledge and skills, yes. But what we have found is that many of the jobs within retailing and wholesaling have general competencies, but the ability how to do the right thing differs and is very special when it comes to selling something and so on. So communication will be very important when you are a salesperson. But that doesn't mean that everybody who can communicate would be a great salesperson, because the ability to work, to use the competence of communication within a certain situation is essential in order to be successful. So, and therefore, we are talking about common competencies that could be useful in many occupations and maybe in more than one sector. Let's give you an example. This is also, I feel so old when I say it's 20 years ago. It was, but this is also 20 years ago. I talked to a HR director at a Swedish bank, and she said, when we are recruiting our clerks at the offices at the banks, we have found that if we recruit nurses, that is the best thing to have, because if we get nurses, we can teach them economy. But it's harder, if we get an economist, it's harder to teach them how to take care of the customer and make the customer feel safe. Because when you go to the bank, you feel insecure and you don't really know if you want to get that loan and so on. So if they got nurses behind the desk, they could calm people down, talk to them, communicate, and if they taught them the economy, they would make the best bank clerks. So the communication used in nursing is transferable to the bank job. So that's a common competence that could be used in different sectors as well. So this is something that is important. And if you look at it within retail and wholesale, you can see that, for instance, service competence is something that is present in almost every occupation within retailing and wholesaling. But it's also present when it comes to hospitality, the people working in the reception at this hotel and so on. So service would also be one of those competences which is common and something which is present in more than one sector. So, and I think this is an important notion when you make a system for validation and so on, because if you would like to transfer, if you would like to take one of the persons who work in the reception of this hotel and help them to become a salesperson in a store, the service competence and a lot of things could be used, so we only have to add certain parts of the job. So this is something that we have been thinking about when it comes to learning and learning outcomes. And then to our sort of, I wouldn't say mistake, but to our experience of validation. So the pursuit of validating competencies in Sweden, I think there are a few components needed for validation and for education, actually. Because if we can get someone to define and articulate the competencies needed for working in a store, for example, that it's not something anyone can do, probably most people can learn how to work in a store, but you can't take someone from the street and put them there and they will do the job. So by having someone to define and articulate competences needed within a certain occupation, having education and training, training these skills within knowledge, skills and abilities, and some system to validate it, we would have a system that works together. The problem in Sweden is that if you go to upper secondary school, they are not talking about learning outcomes. So the education is not communicating with the definition and articulation of competencies, and we do not have a working validation of it. So if we don't have the same language and we use the same language, what we would like to do in Sweden is that we would like the EQF system for knowledge, skills, and ability to set goals for the education, using validation, and defining and articulating competence. Because we believe that if you visualize and recognize competencies, if you visualize it to the individuals who have the competence and get recognition from the employers, you will get empowered people within every occupation. And then the question is, who should do this? Who should be responsible of what? And as you understand, I'm not like education training center person. I think education training is, I'm a representative for the sector of retailing and wholesaling in Sweden. And I think that our social partners are the best to articulate what is needed to work within the sector. So I think the first defining and articulating competence part should be handed to those who work there. That is the social partners, employers and employees within a sector. Education and training, I don't think that the Swedish upper secondary school is all lousy and useless, but I think they should do what they are good at, teaching and developing skills. But they should use the definitions set by the sector. And then validation. Of course, you should use the same set of competencies there, because then validation will become also something that you could check whether an education goal is met. So if we get this system, we will get commonly known competencies that could be visualized to employees who maybe don't know what they know. I have a friend who worked within, he was booking bands and everything for like 15 years. And then he said, then his company should stop existing. And he said to me, Mats, I don't know anything. And I said, what do you mean? You are working with, you are negotiating with the government, you are communicating with like 100 different associations of throughout Sweden who make concerts, you are booking the bands. It's an advanced project leader job you have, and the skills you have can be used in many organizations. But for him, he was just doing his job that he had been doing for 15 years. So when he started to reflect on what he actually could do, it turned out that there were possible occupations even without getting a complementary education. So by visualizing the competencies people have, they will grow and they will see, because if you don't know that you have a competence and that you can do something, you will not even try. So that this is important. Visualize to the individual. Employers recognize the competence, and both the organization and the individual will be empowered. So what we did, like, that's only 10 years ago. So the organizations within our social partners started to form a model for validation. And our model for validation started with the self-assessment and a dialogue with an assessor, which would be lead to competence mapping and a dialogue where the people who got validated would get an idea and get a mapping statement. And that would lead to training, maybe performance review, career development. And then if they had enough, they could go into the assessment part, where we had competence assessment, and then we had 360 assessment, where the person validated would sort of assess their own competencies. The person's boss would assess it, and 2 colleagues would assess it. And then they would compare, are there any gaps? Could it be that I'm assessing my skill in communication as a 3, while my superior would grade it as a 7? How come? How come I don't know, I don't feel that I'm a 7 when the other people thinks I'm a 7? And it could be the other way around, of course. But this is to calibrate the competences. And then we had assessors observing the persons in their job when they were performing their jobs. And they got feedback, and this became sort of the branch attestation. It's almost the same as the fagbrev, but there is one important difference, because we sort of formulated this in a way that we decided to articulate what the person knows, not if they reach a standard. So the question is, should you jump high and pass a bar, or should you jump long and then you should see just how long? You will measure exactly how long it was. And we decided to have a scale. We would grade it on limited competence, basic competence, competent, or professional. And at each state, the interesting thing is, even if you are professional, you can get better. No one here is perfect, and you can always get better. So you can always have a discussion, how could I improve? And I like this scale. So that was sort of the way we measured the competencies for a store seller, for instance. What about our experiences then? We found out that this model was of high validity, high reliability, but it consumes a lot of resources. So it actually became too expensive to fly. I usually describe it as we had a whale with the wings of a sparrow, and it didn't lift. So that was the problem. No one would pay for it in the long run. That's why it's resting now. We also said that we, as social partners, should stay in our lane. We should not be the ones validating. Someone else should do that, because who's good at it. And also, we decided that sub-qualification within the SEQF framework could be a starting point to articulate competencies, contribute to professional development in the retail sector. And actually, I think this is what you are doing here today. I got a presentation. I don't understand the presentations here today, but I got some of it in English yesterday, and I'm really impressed. I think this model has the it's not a whale, and it's got stronger wings than we had. So I think it will fly. Thank you.